confess, lest there be some misunderstanding. He did not get that good talent from me. Appreciate him coming by and doing that for us. Yeah. Luke chapter 6 and verse 12. We're going through a series of the prayers of Jesus. And I'm kind of in liking it and going to enjoy the series of the prayers that we're going to talk about. Some are a little easier than others. Some are a little difficult, but some are quite easy. And today in Luke chapter 6 and verse 12, it says, "And it came to pass in those days that he went out into a high mountain to pray and continued all night in prayer to God." Well, just that mere verse does not tell us what Jesus went out and prayed for. But when we read the next verse and the next several verses, we do discover the matter that we feel confident that Jesus spent all night in prayer praying about. And it said in the next verse, verse 13, "And when it was day, he called unto him his disciples, and of them he chose 12, whom he also named apostles." Obviously, Jesus was all night out in the mountain, up in the hills of Galilee somewhere, not knowing exactly where. I'm surprised they haven't put a stake out in that spot and built a church around it and said, "This is the spot he prayed," but I hadn't seen that yet. But he in a mountain somewhere in Galilee, near the city of Capernaum, he went out and prayed all night. And then the next morning he came back and chose 12 apostles. Don't you know that he was out there praying about the apostles that he was going to choose and appoint the very next day? Obviously, that was what was on his mind and heart, that he was going to ask God to direct him and lead him and choosing. And not only was he seeking leadership from God, he was praying for the men that he was going to appoint, because he was about to appoint to the highest position that's ever been in God's churches, and that is the position of apostles. He was about to appoint the highest position that's ever been appointed. We don't have apostles today. Now, every once in a while, somebody comes along and claims to be an apostle. If you ever heard of the media LinkedIn, similar to Facebook, only it's business stuff on there. You better not post what you had for breakfast on there. But there are people sometimes that will click on to LinkedIn with me, and they'll be apostle such and such. And I hit delete because there are no apostles today. People think they are. There are qualifications for men to have been apostles back then. And one of the very main qualifications was that he had to be with Jesus and an eyewitness to the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Christ. There was only one exception to that rule, and that was the Apostle Paul, and he was a special call, a 13th apostle, who was called to be an apostle to the Gentiles. And even then, he went out into the desert of Arabia and spent quite a bit of time with the Lord himself. And when he returned, he could fill in details about the death, the burial, the resurrection of Christ that even the gospel writers might not have remembered. So he was through the revelation of God, special revelation, he was an eyewitness to those things. So he's going to call these 12 men to be apostles. Now I'm going to review them real quickly, but I got to tell you something. You know, you're just not supposed to talk about people, are you? Right? Right. You're not supposed to talk about people. But when I was in seminary, way back when, we had a brother Gwynn, who was a pastor at Calvary Church in Henderson, and he just taught one of the classes out at the school. And he told us, Brother Eugene, that if you talk about somebody, and you're not supposed to, but if you do, and you say, bless their heart, it's okay. As long as you say, bless their heart. So we're going to talk about these 12 men behind their back, because they're not here. And we're going to talk about their lives and their ministry and so forth. So he's going to begin in verse 14, naming these 12 apostles. There's Simon, it says, whom he also named Peter, and Andrew his brother, and then James and John, and then Philip and Bartholomew, Matthew and Thomas, James the son of Alphaeus, and Simon called Zelotes, and Judas the brother of James, and Judas Iscariot, which also was the traitor. Now, Iscariot is technically not his last name. We notice we just have the first name of everybody else. The word Iscariot comes from two words, Ish, which is the word for man, and Cariot means from the city of Cariot. Ish, the man from the city of Cariot. So that's how this Judas is identified. But we call him Judas Iscariot to distinguish him from the other Judas in the group, and it was a very common name back then. So we got to distinguish this Judas Iscariot from everybody else because he had some different qualifications about him. So the first one that the Lord appointed to be an apostle was Simon Peter the Rock. Bless his heart. Okay, we got to get that in. Simon Peter was from Capernaum on the Sea of Galilee, where he and his brother Andrew were partners with two of the other apostles, James and John, who were both fishermen themselves. So the four of them had a partnership in the fishing trade there out of the Sea of Galilee. Now, it appears that Simon Peter did not have a formal education beyond synagogue school. They had the synagogues in every community, and usually one of the Levites would teach the school, and the school was taught by either the Levites or one of the priests of Israel himself, so that the children going to school could learn about the law and the procedures of the law and keeping the law, and in the process they learned to read and write right out of the Bible. That's a good place to learn to read and write, isn't it? We ought to have more of it. But anyway, beyond the synagogue school and learning to read and write and the aspects of the law, Simon did not have any a major education beyond that. He was just a fisherman. And I'm glad Brother Bo's not here today, because just to have the career, I saw that twinkle in Clint's eye. He knew I'm fixing to talk about fishermen. Well, it takes some skill to be fisherman, doesn't it? But you don't have to have a college degree to be a fisherman. You just got to like fishing real well. And so Simon Peter was a fisherman, and he didn't have a college degree or any further formal in education for his trade. I think we picture old Simon as a sunburn out in the weather, weathered kind of fella with weathered hands and a strong fella that's used to rowing the boat and moving it around. We just look at him as kind of a rugged physique with strong arms and rough hands. And all the four Gospels present Simon Peter as impulsive, rash, hasty, impetuous, over-enthusiastic, and swift to his work. He was a go-getter. And Simon Peter even bragged about what a great follower he was of Jesus, and that he would never deny the Lord, and he would be there all the way to the end, until one day Jesus told him that he would deny the Lord 3 times before the rooster crowed. And when Simon Peter heard that rooster, he looked up at Jesus, and Jesus made eye contact with him. And you talking about slapping old Peter across the head with a stick. Peter was crushed because he knew that he did what he swore he would never do. We've got to be careful about swearing what we won't ever do, don't we? And so this whipped disciple cringed like a whipped dog. And he, when that moment was over with, it said that he went out and wept bitterly. And I can be pretty sure that it's safe to say that for the next day and the next day and the next day, he wept bitterly. He was disappointed in himself. He did what he thought he would never do. And so he wasn't just disappointed that of the wrong he did. He was disappointed that he let himself down. It's sometimes easy to forgive others, harder than to forgive yourself, because we can become disappointed in ourselves. But on the third day, those women had come back from that tomb. They're all excited and shouting, Jesus is alive. And old Peter makes a beeline run for that tomb to see for himself, Jesus is alive. And Jesus appeared to those women early that morning, and then by mid-afternoon, he had a special meeting with Peter. And in that meeting, we can just suppose two things happened. Peter, first of all, blurted out his confession, how he had denied the Lord, how ashamed of himself was. And the second thing that happened, that Jesus reassured him that he was forgiven of what he had done, and that the Lord would restore him to a place of service where he could bring him honor and glory. And you know those two things happened in the exchange that Peter had with the Lord that afternoon. And Peter became one of the strongest spokespersons that Jesus had on earth. You know what? It doesn't matter where you be, it's where you're going that counts, doesn't it? So Jesus chose Peter not because of what he was, but because of the potential that Peter had to become one of the greatest servants and the greatest apostles of all time. The second one we're going to talk about is Andrew the witness. Bless his heart. Peter had a brother named Andrew. Andrew lived in Capernaum as well. And when he met Jesus and was partners with his brother Peter and two others, James and John, in the fishing business. And these brothers were so different. Somebody said that if Peter was a firecracker, Andrew was a sparkler. There was a lot of difference between them. Andrew was drawn to John the Baptist. And we read about John the Baptist had some disciples. And one day, John was with those disciples, and he saw Jesus coming, and he introduced his disciples, said, "Behold, the Lamb of God that takes away the sin of the world." Andrew was one of those two disciples. And Andrew began following the Lord, and Andrew introduced his brother Peter to the Lord. And that's how Peter came to know the Lord. And so Andrew introduced Peter to Jesus. Matter of fact, somebody made a note that every time Andrew is noticeably mentioned in the Bible, he's introducing somebody else to Christ. So Andrew, around the family time, Andrew was sitting over there quiet. Peter's making all the noise. But when it came to introducing people to the Lord, Andrew was out sharing Jesus with his friends. Then we come to the third one. His name was James, and we call him the Hothead. Bless his heart. Come on, help me out. Don't leave me up here all by myself. Can you say that? Bless his heart. All right. We got some more to go. So Peter and Andrew were brothers. James and John were brothers. And these four were involved together in the fishing industry. And James and John were known for their hot tempers. That's why they were called the sons of thunder. They had hot tempers. Jesus had taken the disciples through Samaria one time, and they stopped in one of the cities for an evening rest. Now, it was customary not to leave your visitors out in the middle of the city square for the evening. No, you go by and you invite them to your home and, fix them something to eat and give them a place to rest. Well, the people of Samaria, they were rude. They left Jesus and his disciples out on the square all by themselves all night. Didn't offer them a place to stay. Didn't offer them anything to eat. Didn't even offer them anything to drink. Oh, James and John said, Lord, do we call fire out of heaven like Elijah? Just burn this place up? They was upset. Their tempers, got a little bit out of control. And so James and was one of the two of the hotheads. James and John put their mama up to asking Jesus when he sets up his kingdom if her two boys could sit on one on the right hand and one on the left hand. But in spite of their temper, in spite of their makeup, James was the first one to be martyred of the apostles. Laid his life down for the Lord. As we go through these people were just like people today. We got impetuous Peter. We got Andrew, a little quieter. We got James and John, both had tempers. And God saw potential in people. That's what we do. You ever see the people out on the street sometime, the homeless people? Look at them sometime. Now there's a guy with potential. Some of them's got some real potential. We got to get it out of them, don't we? That's what we're here for, is to see the potential in people. We're going to see every one of those 12 disciples. We got somebody in our church just like it. Somebody around here is going to fit in the same shoes as one of these apostles, because they come from every kind of walk of life and everything was different about them. We come to John. Bless his heart. Y'all are going to sleep on me, aren't you? Bless his heart. John is portrayed as a mild-mannered, gentle youth. He became that, but he didn't start out like that. Not with his brother. They were sons of thunder. More boys have been named after the Apostle John than any other name in the world. We've gotten more names from John than any other name. He was a fisherman, and he was introduced to Jesus by John the Baptist. He and Andrew were there with John, and he was introduced to Jesus by John the Baptist. His association with Jesus transformed him from a quick-tempered young man to a man of great gentleness, and was referred to as the disciple that Jesus loved. And he's the one who wrote the book of John that's named after him, the 3 epistles written about love, and then finally the book of Revelation. And you would like John, wouldn't you? You would like John. John became a great man. What God did for John, he can do for us if we'll let God do that work in our lives. Then we come to the 5th one. I got to move along here pretty quick, or y'all be late for lunch. And I don't want that to happen. It's okay. It's okay if we get out to the lunch line and the rest of the Baptists beat us. And it's okay if some of the Methodists get in line before we do. But if we're so far behind that the Pentecost get in line ahead of us, I know I'm in trouble. Okay. So I'm going to try to move along here a little bit. And we come to the next one, and that's Philip the Cautious. All right. Bless his heart. Y'all are in it with me. I'm not having to do this all by myself up here. Philip was raised in Bethsaida, which was just around the corner from Capernaum, and every reason to believe small communities in those areas, they're going to know each other. And so Philip probably knew Andrew and Peter and probably James and John. Now, Philip was the engineer of the group. He stayed within the boundaries of careful calculations. I could just imagine when old Peter stepped out of that boat and he going to walk on water, that old Philip sitting over there thinking, well, now that water is fluid, it's H2O, that you're a solid. When you step into that water, the law of gravity is going to make you sink. Because he was the engineer. Because when Jesus is about to feed the 5,000, and he's testing his disciples, and he said, how are we going to feed all of these? And old Philip, he spit out a calculation that it would take X number of pennies. That was their monetary term. It'll take at least X number of pennies, and that may be enough to feed these. I mean, his mind went into work, and he'd already calculated. Well, at the McDonald's, if you get a burger and we feed every one of these, it's going to cost us so much money to feed them all. He had that calculating mind. Well, some people have an engineering mind. Now, some people are governed mostly by what goes through their mind, in their brain. Some people are governed strictly by their heart. They make their decisions on their emotions. Some people make their decisions on solid thought. The people who think with their mind don't get along with the people who think with their heart and their emotions. People who think with their emotions don't like those people who think with their mind. But it takes both of us. All right? It takes all of us to make the machinery work well, and when you have a whole category of all of us, then we complement each other, and some fill the void of others complement them. And so it's good to have that, even though the way we think may cause us to, bump into each other. Now we're going to come to Bartholomew, the quiet fellow. All right. Oh, come on out there. I just have one or two helpers up here. We have Bartholomew, the quiet fellow. Oh, yeah, that is good. This disciple has two names. He's called Bartholomew here, but he also had the name Nathaniel. He lived in Cana. Now, Cana was further across the country over there near Nazareth, where Jesus was raised up. And he may have known of Jesus from living there in Cana. Now, he was in the city of Cana probably when Jesus turned the water into wine. And he certainly would have heard all about him at that point in time. But Bartholomew, or Nathaniel, whatever we want to call him, had probably run into the Lord even long before this. Now, he joined Peter in the fishing trade after the resurrection of Christ, and Jesus had communicated them for a few days with them, and Peter said, well, I'm just going to go fishing. Well, he decided to go fishing with them. Nathaniel went fishing with the Lord. When Jesus met Nathaniel, and somebody told Nathaniel about Christ, Nathaniel said, can any good thing come from Nazareth? Two rival towns now. Got Cana just on this side of the hill. You got Nazareth on the other side of the hill. You know how those football teams are. And they've got two rival towns, and he asked, can any good thing come from Nazareth? Well, the first time that Jesus actually met Nathaniel, he said, I saw you sitting under the fig tree. And he was thinking, how did you know that? That Jesus would know all that about him. And that got his attention. When Jesus said that, well, maybe there is something to this Jesus of Nazareth. And so, anyway, when Jesus saw Nathanael, his comment was, an Israelite indeed, in which there is no guile. In other words, he's saying Nathanael is a very godly, honest fella that's trustworthy. Well, let's move on to Matthew, the tax collector. All right. Of all the men called to be apostles, Matthew had the worst reputation of all of them. He was a tax collector. Have you ever had to go in talk to a tax collector about taxes? Or go in and pay your taxes? There's just something about it you don't like being around there, do you? All right. He was a tax collector. Some could have rationalized that Jesus would put the whole group, his whole ministry, in jeopardy by picking a publican, a tax collector. Now, it said that Matthew sat at the seat of customs. So he wasn't just a tax collector that come to you personally and get all your money. He was the guy who sat at customs. He was collecting the taxes from the travelers, traders that come through. You know, the import and export tax. That's the ones that he was collecting from the people that went through. Not all the tax collectors were exactly honest, but I think Matthew was. But that was his trade. Folk didn't like publicans. They didn't like tax collectors, but that was his trade. But Jesus called him. Jesus calls everybody of every walk of life, didn't he? After all, he called us, didn't he? So we can't complain about Matthew. Then the next one, the 8th one, is Thomas the Doubter. Bless his heart. Thomas also has 2 names. He was called Didymus. And he was given the nickname Doubter. Thomas the Doubter. We gave him that name. Somebody dubbed Thomas as the Palestinian who came from Missouri. You know, the show me state, you got to show me. You got to prove it to me. He was the only one of the bunch that had come originally out of Missouri. We don't have anybody in Missouri here, do we? I get in trouble with Arkansas folk every once in a while, but no Missouri. All right. He was from Missouri. He was the negative disciple. All right. Jesus had heard that Lazarus was dead and had been requested to go to Bethany to meet Mary and Martha, his sisters. And I don't know if you remember this, but Thomas made the statement to the other disciples. It says, "Then said Thomas, which is called Didymus, unto his fellow disciples, Let us also go that we may die with him." Boy, that's an encouragement, wasn't it? You know, Jesus told his disciples, "I go to prepare a place for you." And Thomas went on to say, "Whither I go ye know, and the way ye know, but we don't know." And so poor old Thomas, you know, he was just one of those when you say, "Let's do something," and somebody's invariably going, "Well, we can't do that. We can't do that." You know? And so we've always got that person who comes out first. His first response is, "We can't do that." Well, that's just natural with some people. And he said, "Lord, we know not whither thou goest, and how can we know the way?" And last of all, after the resurrection of Jesus, Jesus appeared unto the apostles, had a special invitation to the apostles the very evening of the resurrection, and Thomas wasn't there. And the brethren told Thomas, "We met Jesus. He was with us." He said, "I'll not believe until I put my hands in his side and see the scars." Well, he was one of those fellas that, we can't do that. And he was negative. His first response was negative. Well, that comes along with every category of people, I suppose. Then we come to the next one, James the son of Alphaeus. And he's sometimes nicknamed James the Less, for reasons we don't know why. Maybe he was shorter. I might be called Brother Bobby the Less. You know, they talk about my height here sometimes. Boy, you get them to speak up and they won't do it, and when you don't want them to, anyway, he was called, and it's probably because he was younger. That expression is used refer to the younger. And so he might have been the youngest of the apostles. And if he was one of the youngest apostles, he's probably barely 20 years old and being appointed to this position. He does his work unnoticed, and there's nothing in the world we can say about him. Then we come Judas, the brother of James. In Mark, he's called Thaddeus, and in Luke, he's called Judas, but he's not the Judas Iscariot from the city of Iscariot. He is said to be the brother of James, but the problem is there's so many James in the group, we don't know which one he's the brother of. So he's just the brother of James. And so we rarely get a glimpse of this Judas. And when we do, he asks Jesus this one question. It says, "Judas said unto him," not Iscariot, "Lord, how is it that thou wilt manifest thyself unto us and not unto the world?" He was just asking the question, how is it that we can know these things and the rest of the world doesn't? We come to the 11th one, Simon called Zelotes. And the only thing that we know about this Simon, he was called Simon the Zealot. Zealot is a political description. It's always important to have at least one politician with you if you can. And this was Simon the Zealot. The Zealots were men that had a passion for patriotism, and somewhat of a rebel in Bible times. It was the Zealots that caused Rome to come in and destroy Israel, because they were the guys that would be on the street in the daytime smiling at you, and at nighttime in the back alley clubbing a Roman soldier on the head. And you know, they were the Zealots. They were politically motivated, and so Jesus called Simon. Why did he call Simon? Because Simon had passion. He had zeal. If you could direct that passion and the zeal in spiritual things, in godly things, he would do a great work in the kingdom of God. And even though this Bible or history does not bear the work of Simon, he was a great asset to God's work in the kingdom of God in the places that he went. The last of all, we come to the one, and he probably needs that bless your heart better than anybody, and that's Judas Iscariot the traitor. And verse 16 it said, and Judas Iscariot, which also was the traitor. You can be sure that Jesus prayed about these 12 apostles before he appointed them. And he also prayed about this one named Judas. I am confident that Jesus prayed for his salvation. He offered him salvation better than anybody has ever been offered salvation, but he rejected it. Now I'm going to deal with Judas Iscariot more in a later prayer of Jesus and his betrayal of Christ. But Judas was picked for a special purpose in the ministry and the life of Jesus, not because he was a devout servant. There was a need, there was a reason having to do with the ministry and the work of Jesus as the Christ that he needed Judas, and he called him and he appointed him to this position, knowing that he was a traitor, as the scripture says in another place, that he knew that he was a devil from the beginning, that he was unlost, he was never saved, he never came to Christ, but he had the best opportunity of anybody that ever walked on this earth to be a Christian. You know, there's always that person who will not believe, that person who has never been saved. Sometimes they pretend to be a Christian. He even deceived the other apostles. They thought he was a genuine, the real thing, but in his heart he wasn't. It doesn't matter how we appear on the outside and the image that we portray, it's what's down deep in our heart. And there have been many people who have made a public profession, but in their heart they had never confessed their sins and received the forgiveness of the Lord. So there are people who make the public outward appearance, but inwardly they're not. So we give you the opportunity, whatever the need today is, however we can help you in your spiritual walk with Christ, we'll have a hymn of invitation. Will you stand?